Sofia Wells had audited 14 companies in 6 years, and none of them had ever made her stomach tighten the way the Vitale Cargo and Logistics ledger did at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning. She sat alone in a glass-walled conference room on the 9th floor of a building on Atlantic Avenue, 3 monitors open in front of her, a stack of printed manifests at her elbow, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier without her noticing. The anonymous tip that had landed on her firm's desk 3 weeks before had named a single account, a single irregularity, nothing more. What she had found since then was a pattern stretching back 11 months, careful and quiet, the kind of thing that only showed itself if someone knew exactly where to look. She was 29 years old, with brown hair that fell just past her shoulders and blue eyes that had learned, over the course of her career, to stay flat and unreadable while reading numbers that meant a person's life was about to change. She wore a plum-colored blazer over a cream blouse, and on her left wrist sat a leather-strapped watch that had belonged to her father, its face scratched from years of use before it had ever come to her. She kept it wound even though the mechanism inside had stopped working properly 2 winters ago, because winding it was the only ritual she had left that connected her to him. The discrepancy she had found that morning wasn't like the others. The previous transfers had been small, staggered, almost invisible, unless you cross-referenced 3 separate systems the way she had been trained to do. This one was different. $2.3 million had left a Vitale operating account and landed in an offshore holding company registered in the Caymans, and the authorization on file carried her own professional certification number, not a similar number. Not a number that could be explained by a clerical error. Her number, issued to her by the state board 4 years earlier, attached to a signature that was not her signature, but had been built to look close enough to pass a glance. She read the file 3 times before she let herself believe it. Then she picked up her phone to call her supervisor, and before she could dial, the door of the conference room opened without a knock. Nicholas Vitale walked in already speaking, and the man following him, an older attorney with silver hair and a leather folder pressed against his side, had to move fast to keep pace. Sofia had seen photographs of him during her intake briefing, the kind used to identify a company's ownership structure, but no photograph had prepared her for the way he filled a room. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark brown hair combed back and eyes the color of strong coffee, steady and assessing. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the collar of his shirt open, and there was a stillness in the way he moved that made every other person in the hallway behind him seem to be moving too fast. He had a printout in his hand. He set it down on the table in front of her without sitting, and Sofia recognized it before he even turned it to face her. It was the same transfer record she had been staring at for the last 2 hours. "Tell me why my company just lost $2.3 million to an account in the Caymans," he said, "and why the paperwork says you authorized it." Sofia's first instinct, built over years of delivering difficult numbers to difficult people, was to stay calm. "I found that discrepancy myself," she said. 10 minutes before you walked in. I was about to call my supervisor." "You were about to call your supervisor," he repeated, and there was nothing warm in the way he said it. "After the money already left the account, after your number was already attached to the release. That number isn't mine, or it is mine, but I never authorized this transfer. Someone used my credentials without—" "Someone used your credentials," he said. "Convenient." The attorney beside him, a man named Gregory Holt, stepped forward and opened his folder, but Nicholas raised one hand slightly, and the man stopped mid-motion, closing his mouth. Sofia noticed that. She noticed the way the room seemed to hold its breath around him without anyone telling it to. "I've been auditing your company for 3 weeks," Sofia said, keeping her voice level even as her pulse climbed. "If I wanted to steal from you, I wouldn't leave a signature that could be traced back to my own license within an hour of the transfer clearing. That's not how theft works. That's how a frame works. A frame requires someone with a reason to frame you," Nicholas said. "As far as I can tell, the only person in this building with access to that authorization system today was you. Then check the system logs properly, because I guarantee you they'll show login activity from somewhere I've never been. I intend to." He finally sat down across from her, and the movement was unhurried. The way a man sits when he has already decided how the conversation will end, regardless of what the other person says in the meantime. But until I know exactly what happened to my money, you're not walking out of this building and disappearing into whatever life you had before this morning. Sofia felt something cold settle under her ribs. I have a job, a firm, people expecting me back at the office by 3. Not anymore. He said it simply, the way a man states a fact about the weather. Your firm will be informed that Vitale Cargo and Logistics is extending your assignment indefinitely, effective immediately, at my request and my expense. You'll continue the audit, but you'll do it here, where I can see the work as it happens, and you won't leave this building without my knowledge until I understand where $2.3 million went. That's not how independent audits function. There are also rules about theft, he said. And right now, you're the one standing closer to breaking them. Sofia stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You're threatening me. I'm giving you a choice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You stay here. You help me find out what actually happened. And if it turns out you're telling the truth, this ends quietly and you go back to your firm with your license intact. Or I make one phone call, and by tomorrow morning every accounting board in the state has a file open on Sofia Wells for fraud, and you can spend the next 2 years fighting a case with my company's name behind the accusation, and my company's lawyers filing the paperwork. And if I refuse both, then I assume the worst, he said. Which, given what's sitting in front of me, wouldn't be an unreasonable conclusion. She thought about Taylor, 23 years old, and 11 months from finishing her nursing degree, carrying student loans that Sofia had been quietly covering the interest on for 2 years, because their father hadn't left behind anything except debts and a life insurance policy, too small to matter. She thought about her own license, the thing she had built after 4 years of night classes while working days at a bookkeeping firm that paid barely enough to cover rent. A fraud investigation, even one that eventually cleared her, would follow her name through every database in the industry for the rest of her career. Nobody hired a forensic accountant who had once been accused of the exact crime she was paid to detect. I want it in writing, she said, that I'm here voluntarily, cooperating with your internal investigation, and that nothing in my file reflects wrongdoing unless it's proven. Something flickered across Nicholas's face, brief enough that she almost missed it. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to recalculation, the look of a man encountering a variable he hadn't accounted for. You're negotiating with me. You're accusing me of a felony in a room with no witnesses except your own lawyer. I'd be a fool not to negotiate. He looked at her for a long moment, longer than the conversation required, and Gregory Holt shifted his weight from one foot to the other beside him, clearly uncomfortable with how long the silence stretched. Finally, Nicholas said, "Draft it. Holt will review it before the end of the day. But the terms stand. You work here, under supervision, until this is resolved. And if the money leads somewhere you don't like the answer to, then I'll deal with that when it happens." He stood, buttoning his jacket in one motion. "Ms. Wells, I built this company from a shipping license and a warehouse my father barely kept out of bankruptcy. I don't lose $2 million quietly, and I don't let the person whose name is stamped on the theft walk out the door because she has an explanation that sounds reasonable. It's not an explanation, it's the truth. We'll find out which one it is." He walked toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame, and for a moment Sofia thought he might say something else, something that would soften even slightly the last 10 minutes. Instead, he only said, "Holt will show you to an office on this floor. You start now." He left. Gregory Holt lingered a moment longer, adjusting his folder under his arm, and there was something almost apologetic in the way he looked at her before he spoke. "For what it's worth, Ms. Wells, Mr. Vitale doesn't make accusations he isn't fairly confident about. Then Mr. Vitale is about to learn he was wrong about something for the first time in a while," Sofia said, and Holt's mouth twitched like he wanted to smile, but had trained himself out of it years ago. The office they gave her was smaller than the conference room. Glass on one side facing the open floor of analysts and shipping coordinators. Blinds she could close if she chose, but was warned, gently, not to close too often. A young woman named Priya from the compliance department, dropped off a laptop already configured with limited access to the company's financial systems, enough to continue the audit, not enough to touch payroll or the deeper archives. Sofia understood the message embedded in the access restrictions without anyone needing to explain it to her. She was a guest under guard, not a colleague. She spent the first 2 hours re-pulling every transaction from the last 90 days, cross-referencing login timestamps against the building's security badge logs, which Priya had provided without being asked, likely on someone's orders. The badge logs told her something immediately useful. On the day the transfer cleared, her own badge, the temporary visitor credential issued for the audit, had recorded an entry at 8:52 in the morning. The authorization for the wire transfer had been logged at 6:14 that same morning, 2 hours and 38 minutes before she'd even entered the building. She stared at the timestamp until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like proof. She printed the badge log and the transfer authorization side by side, and she carried both down the hallway toward the office at the far corner that Priya had pointed to earlier as Nicholas Vitale's, a room with frosted glass doors and no nameplate. Because, as Priya had said under her breath, everyone in the building already knew whose office it was. She didn't knock. She pushed the door open the way he had pushed his way into hers earlier that morning, and she found him standing at the window with his back to the door, a phone pressed to his ear, speaking too quietly for her to catch the words. He turned when he heard her enter, and whatever he saw on her face made him end the call without a farewell. The authorization on the wire transfer was logged at 6:14 in the morning, she said, holding up both sheets of paper. My visitor badge, the one your own security system issued me, shows I entered this building at 8:52. I wasn't inside Vitale Cargo and Logistics when that transfer went through. I wasn't inside any building connected to your company. I was at my apartment on Beacon Street, and I can prove that too, because my phone's location history syncs automatically, and I haven't touched the settings in years. Nicholas took the papers from her hand and studied them without speaking, his jaw tightening slightly as he read the 2 timestamps again. Then a third time, the way a man reads something he wants very badly to find a flaw in and can't. Someone entered your credentials remotely, he said finally, not quite a question. That's what I've been trying to tell you since 11:14 this morning. He set the papers down on his desk and looked at her. And this time, there was no accusation in his expression, only a kind of tightly held frustration that seemed directed inward rather than at her. If it wasn't you sitting at a terminal, then someone with legitimate system access authorized that transfer and built it to look like your signature. That's not a stranger. That's someone inside this company. Which means whoever did it had access to my certification number before my first working day on this assignment, Sofia said. This wasn't improvised this morning. Someone planned to use me specifically, weeks in advance, which means they knew I'd been assigned to this audit before I did. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, and outside the frosted glass, Sofia could hear the low hum of the analyst's floor, phones ringing, someone laughing at something 2 desks away. The ordinary sound of a business that from the outside looked exactly like any other shipping company in Boston. You're not leaving, he said eventually. I just proved I didn't take your money. You proved you weren't physically in the building when the transfer cleared. You haven't proved who was, and neither have I. And until I know who inside my own company is capable of forging documents this clean, you're the only person who's shown me proof of anything today. That makes you more valuable to me now, not less. He picked the badge log back up, studying it once more as though the timestamp might rearrange itself if he looked hard enough. The terms from this morning stand. You work here. You keep digging. But I'll have Holt draw up something different than what we discussed. Something that reflects this isn't an investigation into you anymore. Into what then? Into whoever wanted it to look like it was you, Nicholas said. And for the first time since he had walked into the conference room 3 hours earlier, his voice carried something other than command, something closer to the low, careful tone of a man recalculating every assumption he had built his morning on. Sofia didn't move from the doorway right away. She thought of her father's watch on her wrist, stopped at whatever hour it had stopped years ago, and she thought of Taylor, still asleep at her own apartment across the river, unaware that her sister's entire professional life had just been rearranged by a man she had never met and a crime neither of them had committed. She thought about the 2 hours and 38 minutes sitting between a wire transfer and her own arrival, a gap that someone had measured with terrible precision, and she understood, standing there in a stranger's office with her name attached to a theft she hadn't performed, that whoever had built this trap had known far more about her schedule, her credentials, and her life than any stranger reasonably should. The next morning, Sofia Wells arrived at Vitale Cargo and Logistics before the first shift had finished checking in. She had slept for less than 4 hours, not because she had been frightened by Nicholas Vitale's warning, but because the numbers from the previous day had refused to settle into a coherent pattern. A forged certification number was one problem. A remote authorization was another. But the timing suggested preparation. Whoever had created the false trail had known which account to touch, which credentials to imitate, and when Sofia's audit would begin. That combination was too deliberate to be the work of someone trying to steal quickly. It looked like someone had wanted the missing money to be discovered only after her name had been attached to it. She carried a fresh notebook, 2 sharpened pencils, and a paper bag containing breakfast she had forced herself to buy on the way. Her plum blazer from the previous day had been replaced by a terracotta jacket over a white blouse. The leather watch on her wrist remained unchanged, its hands still showing the same useless hour. At the security desk, the guard recognized her and waved her through without asking for identification. Sofia stopped. "I need the entry record from yesterday, printed and signed," she said. The guard glanced toward the security office. "Mr. Vitale already requested the logs. Then there should be no problem giving me a copy." He hesitated only long enough to understand that she wasn't asking for a favor. A few minutes later, he handed her the pages. Sofia checked the timestamps, compared them with the digital copy saved on her laptop, and placed both inside a transparent sleeve. When she reached the 9th floor, Priya was waiting beside the elevators with a tablet tucked against her chest. The compliance officer led her directly to the systems room, where Nicholas stood with Gregory Holt and Daniel Moser, the company's director of information security. Moser had isolated the forged authorization. Sofia's certification number had been entered through an external session, but the system had accepted a temporary token generated by a dormant administrator profile belonging to Caleb Rourke, a former technician who had left 9 months earlier. "Why was his profile active?" Sofia asked. "It shouldn't have been," Moser said. "That isn't an answer." Nicholas looked at him. "Give her the rest." The profile had been active for 17 minutes. Its reactivation originated from a machine carrying an internal certificate assigned to a warehouse workstation at Pier 11. 6 people had regular access to that station, among them Foreman Andrew Price, 2 shift supervisors, a customs liaison, and contracted security. Sofia copied the names. "I want the full access history for all 6. "You'll have it," Nicholas said. She also requested the original manifests linked to the transfer. Nicholas agreed, but insisted that she enter restricted areas with an escort. "I don't need anyone touching my files or answering for me." "They won't." Before she could continue, Nicholas told her Pier 11 had been closed after an overnight fire in the records section. It had started at 3:27 in the morning. One employee had been treated for smoke exposure, and the fire marshal had not yet determined the cause. Sofia's attention sharpened. What records were stored there? "Shipping manifests, vendor files, customs paperwork," Priya said. "Then I want the fire report. Every camera angle, and the names of everyone who entered that area after midnight." Nicholas glanced at Moser. "Copy everything, no summaries." While the pier remained closed, Sofia worked through the files that had been moved to a guarded conference room. The shipment tied to the offshore transfer had 3 incompatible descriptions: refrigerated pharmaceutical equipment in the financial records, industrial machine parts on the manifest, and replacement valves on the customs declaration. Worse, the payment had been made 11 days before the container was recorded as entering the port. The vendor had no active phone number, no functioning office, and a corporate registration that had changed hands twice in the previous year. Could it be an advance payment? Priya asked. The contract would say so. Could the file be incomplete? Yes, which is why we don't pretend a possibility is evidence. Sofia traced the approval page. The vendor contract had been authorized by Marco Bellini, operations director and signatory for high-value shipments. She wrote his name in her notebook without circling it. Not yet. At 4:15, Moser returned with the camera footage and preliminary fire report. Sofia required him to sign the chain of custody transfer before she accepted the drive. The first camera showed a maintenance van entering Pier 11 at 3:22 and leaving 4 minutes later. At 3:27, smoke appeared behind the records room windows. There had been no maintenance request. A second camera caught the van at the south gate, but glare obscured the plate. A third caught it leaving, but the gate arm blocked the lower half of the vehicle. Sofia asked Moser to check the recording continuity. The south gate feed had lost 12 seconds at 3:20. The east loading camera had lost 9 seconds at 3:31. Transmission irregularities, Moser said. 2 irregularities around an unrequested van and a fire are no longer random enough to ignore. Nicholas entered the room. You're treating the fire as deliberate. I'm treating the circumstances as deliberate until the evidence gives me a better explanation. For once, he did not argue. Sofia found his name on the approval page. Marco was listed as operations director and authorized signatory for high-value shipments. She wrote his name in her notebook, then continued sorting. At 4:15, Daniel Moser returned with a secured drive and a printed incident report. He placed them in front of Sofia, but kept one hand on the drive. The footage is copied from the main server, he said. The fire report is preliminary. Who authorized the copy? Mr. Vitale. Good. Then you won't mind signing for the transfer. Moser looked at Nicholas through the glass. Nicholas gave a slight nod. Moser signed the chain of custody form and handed over the drive. Sofia opened the footage on the conference room monitor. The camera angle showed the exterior of Pier 11, the loading lanes, and the entrance to the records building. At 3:18, a security guard walked past the frame. At 3:22, a delivery van entered the service lane and stopped outside the records building. At 3:26, the same van left. At 3:27, smoke began to appear behind the upper windows. There, Sofia said. Moser leaned forward. The van belongs to a maintenance contractor. Why would maintenance arrive at 3:22 in the morning? It could have been an emergency call. Was there an emergency call? He checked the incident report. No. Then find out who requested the visit. Moser rewound the footage. Sofia watched the van again. There was no logo on the side, only a small rectangular placard on the windshield. She enlarged the image, but the resolution was poor. The driver remained invisible behind the reflection. Can you pull the license plate? Moser shook his head. Not clearly. Try the camera at the south gate. He brought up another angle. The van passed through at 3:21, but the plate was obscured by glare. Sofia asked for the east loading camera. That showed the van leaving, but the gate arm blocked the lower half of the vehicle. She made a note of every limitation. How many cameras were offline? Moser's answer came after a pause. None. How many recordings have missing intervals? He looked at her. Why? Because the van was visible from 3 angles and none of them gave us a readable plate. That can happen by chance once. 3 times is a pattern worth testing. Moser opened another system. The south gate camera lost 12 seconds of footage at 3:20. And the east loading camera, 9 seconds at 3:31. Why? Transmission irregularity. Was that reported before the fire? No. Sofia wrote it down and looked at Nicholas. Someone interfered with the cameras. He entered the room and closed the door behind him. That's an assumption. It's a conclusion based on 3 facts. A maintenance van arrived without a service request. 2 cameras lost footage at the exact window surrounding its arrival and departure. A fire started inside a restricted records area 6 minutes after the van entered. You don't know whether the fire was deliberate? No. I know it occurred under circumstances that deserve to be treated as deliberate until evidence proves otherwise. Nicholas studied the screen. What was in the records area? Paper manifests, customs documentation, archived vendor files, Moser answered. Nothing that isn't duplicated digitally. Sofia turned toward him. Not everything is duplicated digitally. Original signatures, handwritten notes, receiving stamps, alterations to paper invoices, those can matter. Nicholas looked at her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that whoever built the fraudulent trail may have used physical documents to support the digital lie. If those files were destroyed, the person responsible didn't want a complete reconstruction. Then we'll reconstruct it without them. With what? With whatever remains. The fire marshal cleared the building shortly before 6. Nicholas sent Sofia to Pier 11 with Priya and 2 security officers, not because she had asked for them, but because he had ordered it. The drive containing the camera footage remained in her possession, sealed in a plastic evidence bag she had signed. The warehouse smelled of burned paper and wet insulation. The fire had been contained to a narrow records room beside the administrative office. The walls were blackened around the doorway, and part of the ceiling had collapsed onto metal filing cabinets. Firefighters had removed the damaged boxes and arranged them under a canvas cover in the loading area. Sofia put on gloves and began examining the surviving material. Priya stood beside her with a clipboard. What are you looking for? Anything that was moved before the fire. How can you tell? Paper burns differently, depending on whether it was inside a closed box, exposed on a shelf, or carried in a stack. The ashes aren't random. She lifted a half-burned folder from a crate and examined the edges. The outer pages were blackened, but the center retained enough text to identify a vendor code. She matched it against her notes. It belonged to the company that had received the $2.3 million. This folder was in the records room, Priya said. Apparently. Then why wasn't the entire vendor file destroyed? Because the fire was stopped before it reached the lower cabinets, or because someone needed to make it look incomplete rather than erased. A security officer named Michael Costa watched them from the doorway. He was 38, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and brown eyes. He had worked for Vitale Cargo for 4 years and had said almost nothing since they entered. Sofia noticed that he kept looking toward the far end of the warehouse, where a row of empty pallets stood beneath a security camera. Who was on the night shift? She asked. Michael answered immediately. Andrew Price was the foreman, 2 loaders, 1 inventory clerk, and me. Did anyone leave the floor between 3 and 4? Andrew went to the records office after the alarm. Before the alarm? Michael's gaze shifted. Not that I saw. That wasn't my question. He remained silent. Nicholas had followed them into the warehouse without Sofia noticing. He stood several feet away, wearing a dark overcoat over his suit, his hands bare despite the cold air moving through the damaged building. Answer her, he said. Michael's shoulders tightened. Andrew went to the records office at 3:10. Why? Sofia asked. He said he needed an old manifest. Which manifest? I don't know. Did he carry anything? Michael looked toward Nicholas. A folder. What color? Brown. Did he return with it? Not that I saw. Sofia wrote down the time. Who was operating the cameras? Security desk. Who had access to the camera controls? Me, Andrew, and the overnight supervisor. Name? Robert D'Angelo. Where is he now? At home, I think. Nicholas turned to one of his men. Find him. Michael lowered his eyes. Mr. Vitale, I didn't know. Nicholas looked at him. No one asked you to explain yet. The sentence was quiet, but Michael stopped speaking. Sofia continued through the damaged files. Near the bottom of a crate, she found a strip of paper with a partial handwritten note. Most of it had been destroyed, but 2 words remained legible. Revised route. Beneath them was a string of digits matching a container number she had already identified in the digital records. She held the fragment up to the light. This wasn't in the standard file. Priya leaned closer. How do you know? Because the paper stock is different. The original manifest used pre-printed forms. This was written on plain ledger paper. Nicholas came nearer. What does it mean? It means someone was making changes outside the normal documentation process. Can you identify the handwriting? Not from 6 words. Then find out where the rest of the note went. Sofia looked at the burned room. If I could, I wouldn't be standing here. More. For the first time, Nicholas's expression almost changed into something resembling amusement, but it vanished before it could become a smile. You have an answer for everything. No. I have questions for everything. That's how audits work. They spent the next 90 minutes sorting the material into 3 groups: documents that could be read, documents that might be recovered, and documents that were gone beyond recovery. Sofia photographed every fragment before moving it and recorded the location where it had been found. She refused to accept verbal assurances about chain of custody. Every folder entered a numbered sleeve. Every sleeve received a signature. When she reached the lower cabinet closest to the wall, she found a metal box that had survived the fire with only a warped lid. Inside were vendor approval forms, 1 duplicate customs declaration, and a handwritten list of container numbers. The list included 3 shipments that had been processed through Pier 11 but did not appear in the company's internal routing database. She checked the first number against the port records. The container had entered Boston 12 days earlier under a company registered in Delaware. It had left the port 6 hours later under a different carrier. The second had the same pattern. The third was the container linked to the offshore payment. Sofia felt the case change shape. Until that moment, the fraud had looked like an attack on the company's bank account using her identity. Now it appeared connected to physical movement through the warehouse, where people had altered routes and hidden cargo records. She took the list to Nicholas. "This is your missing bridge," she said. "The money transfer, the forged certification number, and the shipments are connected." He read the numbers without touching the paper. "What was in the containers?" "I don't know yet." "Can you find out?" "Not from this warehouse. I need port records, carrier records, customs declarations, and the original receiving reports. I also need to know who changed the routes. Then you'll have access." "Not from inside this building." Nicholas looked toward the damaged room. "You think the answer is at the port. I think the answer is wherever the physical records were created. The digital records were altered after the fact." "How certain?" "Certain enough to keep looking." He held her gaze for a moment, then turned to Priya. "Give Sofia full access to procurement, shipping, and customs archives. If a file is restricted, clear it through me." Priya nodded. Sofia gathered the papers and returned them to their sleeves. She was aware of Nicholas standing nearby, but she did not look at him again until the evidence was secured. When she finally did, he was watching her hands rather than her face, observing the care with which she labeled each document. "You don't trust anyone here," he said. "Trust isn't part of the procedure." "That wasn't what I asked." "No," she said. "It wasn't." A fire investigator arrived with a preliminary statement before they left the pier. The fire had begun near a metal filing cabinet, where no electrical wiring ran through the wall. A damaged plastic container containing a small amount of accelerant had been recovered beneath the debris. The investigator did not declare arson until the laboratory confirmed the results, but he advised Nicholas to preserve every item connected to the room. Sofia listened without interrupting. She looked once toward the entrance where the maintenance van had appeared on the footage, and then at the burned office. Nicholas said, "You were right to treat it as deliberate." "I didn't say I was right." "You didn't need to." The trip back to the main building took place in silence. Sofia sat in the rear of the car with Priya, the evidence cases secured between them. Nicholas occupied the front passenger seat, speaking occasionally to the driver in low tones. No one asked whether Sofia was frightened. No one offered reassurance that the building was safe. The facts were treated as facts, which suited her better than empty comfort. At the office, she returned to the 9th floor conference room and began building a timeline. She wrote the suspicious transfer at the top, then added the dormant administrator account, the warehouse terminal, the maintenance van, the camera interruptions, the fire, the missing vendor files, and the 3 containers that had disappeared from the internal routing database. Priya watched the wall fill with dates and times. If the fire was meant to erase the route records, why leave the handwritten list? Because the person who started it didn't know the list existed, or because they wanted us to find it? Sofia considered that. Possible. Which possibility do you believe? I don't decide based on what feels dramatic. Priya gave her a tired look. You really do answer everything like a deposition. And you really do ask questions without enough evidence. Nicholas entered the room while they were speaking. He had removed his overcoat and carried a sealed envelope in one hand. His eyes went immediately to the timeline on the wall. Robert D'Angelo was found at his apartment, he said. He claims he was home by 3:15 and never returned to the pier. Can he prove it? He has a neighbor who heard him come in. That doesn't prove he stayed there. No, it proves someone is willing to support his story. Sofia added his name to the timeline. What about Andrew Price? Still being located. Does he have access to the warehouse administrator terminal? Yes. Then find him before someone else does. Nicholas set the envelope on the table. This came from your firm. Sofia opened it. Inside was a formal letter confirming that her assignment to Vitale Cargo had been transferred under an emergency investigative clause. Her supervisor had signed it. The letter also stated that Sofia would retain independent authority over her findings and could submit them directly to the relevant regulatory agencies. She read it twice. Your supervisor agreed, Nicholas said, because you offered triple the firm's standard rate. Your supervisor agreed because I offered compensation for the firm's lost contract. Your salary remains unchanged. That distinction matters. To you, apparently. To anyone who doesn't want their employment to look like a purchase. Nicholas leaned one hand against the table. Your sister is Taylor Wells. Sofia went still. He did not say it as a question. He had already known. How did you get that name? I ran a background check after your credentials appeared on the transfer. You investigated my family before proving I had done anything. I investigated everyone connected to the account. Taylor isn't connected to the account. She is connected to you. Sofia closed the envelope and placed it on the table. You don't contact her. You don't approach her. You don't send anyone near her apartment or her school. If you need information about me, ask me. Nicholas's gaze held hers. I know where she studies. I know her class schedule. I know that her tuition payment is due in 16 days. Sofia's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the envelope. You had no right. I had every right to know whether someone could pressure you through your family. Knowing where she studies isn't protection. It's surveillance. At the moment, I don't know which one it is. Then don't turn it into a threat. His expression became colder. I didn't threaten her. You threatened me yesterday. Today you tell me you have her schedule. You can call it whatever you like, but I'm not going to pretend that doesn't carry meaning. Nicholas looked at her for several seconds. Then he reached for the envelope and closed it more firmly. Taylor Wells will not be contacted. No one will approach her. If the investigation shows a credible threat against her, you'll hear it from me before anyone else acts. Sofia studied him, searching for the hidden condition in the promise. She found no softness, but she also found no attempt to argue. I appreciate that, she said. It was the first time she had thanked him for anything since he had accused her of stealing. The words were simple, but Nicholas seemed to register them. His posture shifted by a fraction, and his attention remained on her a moment longer before he turned toward the wall. Continue the timeline, he said. Tomorrow, you will review every shipment approved by Marco Bellini during the last year. Sofia looked at the name already written on the board. Why Marco? Because he approved the vendor contract connected to the transfer. Then why wait until tomorrow? Because it's after 9, and you've been working since before dawn. I'm not tired. That doesn't mean you're useful. She raised an eyebrow. That's almost concern. It's an observation. Of course. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. There is food in the employee kitchen. Priya will show you where it is. I brought breakfast. That was yesterday. Sofia glanced at the paper bag she had left unopened near her laptop. The pastry inside had been crushed beneath a stack of documents, and the coffee she had bought that morning was cold again. Nicholas noticed the direction of her glance. He said nothing else. He simply walked away. Priya waited until he was out of sight. You know he doesn't tell people to eat. Then perhaps he should start. He doesn't tell people much of anything. Sofia gathered her papers. That isn't my problem. No, Priya said quietly. But the person who burned the records might be. Sofia looked at the wall. The timeline stretched from a false authorization to a destroyed archive, with 3 containers sitting in the middle like missing pieces of a larger design. Her name had been placed at the beginning of the chain because someone wanted it there. Her sister's name had been found because Nicholas wanted to know where pressure could be applied. And somewhere inside the company, a former employee's dormant access profile had been revived for 17 minutes, long enough to move money, create a false trail, and leave behind a question no one had yet answered. She removed her father's watch and placed it beside the laptop while she continued working. The hands remained frozen at the same hour, but the rest of the night kept moving around them. Sofia knew something was wrong when Taylor called Thursday evening instead of sending a message. Her sister was still at the nursing school. A black sedan with tinted windows had been parked across from the east entrance for 20 minutes. "Go back inside," Sofia said. "Stay near the reception desk and the cameras." She crossed the 9th floor while keeping Taylor on the phone. Nicholas saw her expression before she reached his office. "My sister is being watched." His response was immediate, but controlled. He told Gregory to contact school security and instructed Michael Costa to drive to the area without approaching Taylor or drawing attention to the car. Taylor sent a photograph from inside the lobby. The sedan was older, with a dent above the rear wheel and a temporary plate obscured by glare. Nicholas studied it. "A vehicle matching that description has been seen near 2 Vitale properties this week. You didn't tell me. I didn't know whether it was surveillance. Now? Now I do." A man in a grey jacket appeared inside the school and began drifting toward Taylor. Sofia told her to move behind the reception desk and have the guards secure the interior door. Nicholas coordinated with the school's security supervisor, while Michael watched the service road from a distance. Within minutes, the man disappeared and the sedan left. Michael did not pursue it. "Good," Sofia said when Nicholas told her. "Getting Taylor out safely matters more than chasing a car." He nodded. Agreed. They drove to the school together. During the trip, Nicholas asked what Sofia had uncovered that might have made her sister useful as leverage. She gave him the essentials: the missing containers, the forged certification, the altered routes, and Marco Bellini's approvals. "Marco has worked for my family for 18 years, he said. "Then 18 years gives him history. It doesn't give him immunity." Nicholas looked out the window. "No, it doesn't." At the school, Taylor met them through the service corridor. She crossed straight to Sofia and held her. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Did anyone touch you?" "No, they just watched." Taylor noticed Nicholas a few steps away and immediately recognized the name. "The man whose company accused you." "His company isn't accusing me anymore," Sofia said. Taylor remained suspicious. Nicholas did not try to charm her. He explained exactly what had been done, what he believed the risk was, and what protection he could offer. Taylor refused to be moved without understanding why. So Sofia told her the truth. Someone had stolen her professional identity, a records room had been burned, shipping records had been altered, and someone inside Vitale Cargo might now be trying to pressure her through family. When she finished, Taylor looked at Nicholas. "And you think the people behind it followed me? I think that possibility is serious enough not to gamble with." He offered a secured apartment on Marlborough Street with controlled access, cameras, and a driver outside. He also made clear she could refuse. Taylor looked at Sofia. "I still don't trust him." "Neither did I." Nicholas accepted the remark without offense. After a moment, Taylor agreed. Michael escorted her to the car. Sofia watched until the vehicle disappeared, then turned toward Nicholas. "You let her choose. She isn't a package." The answer struck deeper than she expected. His control still irritated her, but this was different. He had listened to the boundaries she set and, when it mattered, respected it. For the first time, Sofia saw something beneath the authority that had defined him from the beginning. Not softness exactly. Discipline directed towards someone else's freedom. Their eyes held for a second longer than necessary. Then Sofia looked away first. Taylor called after reaching Marlborough Street. She said the apartment was secure, the driver was outside, and there was food in the refrigerator. Nicholas told Sofia she could stay with her sister. "I can't. Not yet. The evidence will still exist in the morning." The fire already proved that isn't guaranteed. He studied her. Then additional security stays with you. This time she did not argue. I accept. The words surprised both of them slightly. Nicholas's expression changed by almost nothing, but Sofia had begun to notice how much he could say without moving at all. Nicholas sat across from her in the car. You can stay with her tonight. I can't. Why not? Because the person who built this operation expects me to be frightened enough to stop examining it. If I leave now, that person gets time. Back upstairs, Priya had found another intrusion. Someone had remotely accessed the Pier 11 workstation after the fire and searched the records for the 3 missing containers. The session attempted to locate preserved copies and then probed the backup system before disconnecting. Checking how much we already knew, Sofia said. The remote tool had been installed by security. Moser claimed only a handful of people knew the master access route. Nicholas summoned him. Under questioning, Moser admitted that Caleb Rourke had originally configured the terminal. More importantly, the dormant administrator profile could be reactivated by anyone possessing the master security credential. Who has it? Nicholas asked. Moser hesitated. Answer. You, me, Marco Bellini. The room became still. The physical credential was stored in Moser's office safe. He could not explain whether it had been copied or who had opened the safe. Sofia added Marco's name beneath Caleb Rourke's on the timeline, followed by a question mark rather than an accusation. The remote session had originated from the main Vitale building less than an hour after Sofia ordered the backup preservation. Whoever was inside the system knew what the investigation had found and reacted quickly. Her thoughts went immediately to Taylor. She called Marlborough Street. Taylor answered at once. The doors were locked, the curtains closed, and the driver was still outside. Are you coming tonight? Taylor asked. I will. Promise. Sofia looked through the glass wall. Nicholas was watching her, not intruding, simply understanding. I promise. After the call, he entered. Go to her. We are close. You've been working 17 hours. I said 16. I counted. She almost smiled despite herself. Of course you did. He waited while she encrypted the files onto 3 separate drives, and Priya signed the transfers. Only when the copies were complete did Sofia close the laptop. At the elevator, Nicholas reached past her to press the button. His hand paused near hers without touching. You don't have to thank me for protecting Taylor, he said. I know. Then why do you keep doing it? Sofia looked at him. Because you're learning the difference between protecting someone and controlling them. For once, he had no immediate answer. She left for Marlborough Street with that silence between them, and it felt less hostile than any silence they had shared before. The frozen hands still pointed to the same hour. She had spent the day learning that danger could reach beyond a bank account, beyond a burned archive, beyond the walls of a company. It could follow a young woman from a nursing school and wait across a parking lot without saying a word. It could use the people someone loved as a message. But the threat had also revealed something useful. Whoever stood behind the fraud was no longer working in the dark with complete freedom. Their access, their timing, and their mistakes had begun to form a pattern. Sofia would take that pattern to Taylor, to the secured apartment on Marlborough Street, and back to the evidence room in the morning. For now, she walked beside Nicholas toward the private elevator, accepting the protection she had once refused, not because fear had made the decision for her, but because she had measured the risk and chosen the most rational way forward. By Friday morning, Sofia Wells had stopped treating Marco Bellini's name as a possibility and started treating it as a question that required an answer. She had spent the previous night at the Marlborough Street apartment with Taylor, sleeping on a narrow sofa while her sister took the bedroom. Nothing had happened outside. No unfamiliar vehicle had remained at the curb. No one had approached the entrance, and the driver Nicholas had assigned had left only after Sofia called him at 6 in the morning and said Taylor was safe. Safety had not made the situation feel smaller. Before dawn, Sofia had opened the encrypted files on her laptop and reviewed the access logs again. The same pattern remained. An administrator profile that should have been inactive. a warehouse certificate used from the main building, and a remote session aimed at locating the preserved records for 3 containers that had vanished from Vitale Cargo and Logistics routing database. Every path led toward people with authority. Marco Bellini possessed the master security credential. He had approved the vendor contract connected to the offshore transfer. He had signed 2 route revisions linked to the missing containers. He also had enough knowledge of the company to understand exactly which records could expose the operation. None of that proved he had created the fraud. It did, however, prove that he had access to every part of it. Sofia arrived at the Vitale building at 7:02, wearing a cinnamon-colored jacket over a black blouse. Her brown hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and the old leather watch on her wrist remained frozen at the same useless hour. Taylor had insisted that she eat before leaving, so Sofia carried a paper cup of tea and a wrapped sandwich that she had promised to finish before noon. Nicholas was already on the 9th floor. He stood in the center of the conference room with Gregory Holt, Daniel Moser, and Marco Bellini. Sofia had seen Marco only in photographs and in the approval records. In person, he looked younger than his 36 years, with black hair, warm brown eyes, and an easy expression that made him seem less threatening than the other men in the room. He wore a dark brown suit and a silver watch, and he held his hands loosely in front of him, as though he had walked into an ordinary business meeting. Nicholas did not look ordinary. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his strong frame motionless beside the table, and his light brown eyes were fixed on Marco with a degree of attention that made the air feel narrower. He had no visible scar on his face, nothing that softened or distorted the clean lines of his features. His appearance remained controlled, attractive, and almost severe. But Sofia had learned that the most dangerous part of him was not his size or his voice. It was the patience with which he waited for other people to reveal themselves. Marco turned toward her. "Miss Wells," he said, "I understand you've been reviewing my approvals." "I have. Then perhaps you can tell me why I'm being treated like a suspect." "That depends on whether you answer the questions." His pleasant expression held. "I answer questions from Mr. Vitale." Nicholas spoke without looking away from him. "You will answer hers." Marco's gaze moved between them. "Of course." Sofia placed her laptop on the table and opened the first file. The vendor contract for North Star Industrial Components was approved by you 11 months ago. The company had no active office at the address listed. Its phone number had been disconnected, and the corporate registration had changed hands twice within 6 months. Why did you authorize the contract? Because the vendor offered favorable terms. That doesn't answer the question. It answers it completely. We needed replacement machinery, and North Star had the lowest bid. Where is the machinery? Delivered. Which warehouse received it? Pier 11. The receiving reports for that delivery are missing. Marco lifted one shoulder. The fire damaged the records. The receiving reports were deleted from the routing database before the fire. Then someone in information security should explain that. Sofia watched his face while he spoke. He did not glance toward Moser. He did not ask when she had learned about the deletion. He did not appear surprised that she knew. That lack of surprise was not proof, but it was information. She opened a second file. The vendor's bank account received 2 payments before any shipment arrived. One was for $380,000. The other was for $2.3 million. The larger payment is the one connected to the theft allegation. The larger payment is the one connected to an account using my certification number. Marco's eyes moved briefly to her watch, then returned to her face. "And you believe I arranged that?" "I believe you approved the underlying vendor contract. An approval isn't a crime." "No, it is an authorization." Nicholas leaned one hand against the edge of the table. "Continue." Sofia brought up the route revisions. These 3 container numbers were entered into the system as industrial equipment. The customs declaration identifies replacement valves. The vendor invoice describes refrigerated pharmaceutical machinery. The receiving list found in the damaged records room contains no cargo description at all. Marco looked at the screen. Different departments use different terminology. Not when a container crosses customs. You've been working with our records for less than a month. I've been working with financial records for 6 years. And you think that makes you an expert in shipping? I know when three documents describing the same movement contradict each other. Marco's expression remained agreeable, but the warmth had left his eyes. You should be careful with conclusions. I am careful. That's why I'm asking questions instead of making accusations. Nicholas watched him. Where was the cargo sent after Pier 11? Marco answered too quickly. To Newark. Sofia glanced down at the manifest. The route revision says Baltimore. The destination changed. Who approved the change? Operations. Which means you. Marco did not reply. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but Sofia noticed that Gregory Holt stopped turning the pages in his folder. Daniel Moser looked at the floor. Nicholas straightened. Who else knew the route had changed? Everyone in operations has access to the schedule. That wasn't the question. Marco looked directly at him. I don't keep a list of every employee who can view a shipping route, but you can tell us who had authority to change one. Marco's face hardened by a fraction. I approved the revision. That is not the same as creating a fraudulent transfer. No one said it was, Sofia replied. We're establishing who could. Marco looked at her again, and she saw the first clear sign of hostility. It was not anger. It was offense, the reaction of someone who had been accustomed to being believed because he sounded reasonable. Nicholas dismissed him without raising his voice. You will remain available. Marco rose. Am I being detained? No. Then I expect to leave. You can leave, Nicholas said. If you do, your company access is suspended immediately. Your devices are preserved through counsel, and my security detail stops treating you as someone under Vitale protection. Call your attorney before you decide. Marco's jaw tightened. You're threatening my position. I'm defining the consequences of leaving an active internal investigation. For the first time, the ease disappeared completely from Marco's expression. He looked at Nicholas for several seconds, then walked out through the glass door with his shoulders still straight. Sofia waited until he was gone before speaking. You knew he had access to the master credential. I knew. And you allowed him to sit in this room without removing his phone. He entered the building with a phone. You could have taken it. I could have. Then he would know exactly how much I suspected. Sofia closed the file. You wanted him to think he still had room to move. I wanted to see whether he would use it. Daniel Moser looked up. Mr. Vitale, if Bellini has the master credential, we should change the security system immediately. Not yet. Moser stared at him. If he's involved, changing the system tells him we've identified the access route. We need to know what he does when he believes it remains open. Sofia understood the strategy. It was dangerous, but it was not careless. Nicholas was allowing a controlled vulnerability to remain in place so that the person behind the fraud would reveal himself. I want a copy of every outgoing communication from the operations department for the last 14 days, she said. Moser shook his head. That requires a privacy review. Nicholas looked at him. Moser stopped. I'll have it by noon, he said. Sofia returned to the conference room with Priya and began mapping Marco's relationship to the suspect vendor. The company had been created by a registered agent in Delaware, its first account opened by a man named Jason Cooper, and its bank transfers had passed through a financial institution in New Jersey before moving offshore. Jason Cooper had no prior connection to industrial machinery, no employees, and no registered warehouse. At 9:46, Priya found a secondary email address in an old procurement file. It had been used to send the first contract draft to Marco's office. The address belonged to a consulting firm in Brooklyn. The firm had closed 6 months earlier, but its archived website listed one former consultant, Anthony Grimaldero. Sofia searched the name across the shipping records. Anthony had been listed as an external logistics consultant for 2 separate Vitale subsidiaries. His contract had ended 8 months earlier, but the document showed that Marco had authorized his final payment. Is he connected to the containers? Priya asked. Not directly, but he sent the contract. Could he be the person who created the vendor? Maybe. Do you believe that? I believe we need his records. They traced the consulting firm's bank account and discovered that its final payment from Vitale had been followed by a series of transfers to an account controlled by a Russian import company. The company name appeared in a customs dispute from 3 years earlier involving counterfeit medical equipment. Sofia printed the record and placed it beside the vendor contract. The Russians, Priya said. Sofia nodded. A possible connection, not a conclusion. But if the money was moving through a company tied to Russian organized crime, then it gives us motive and risk. It still doesn't tell us who inside Vitale opened the door. Nicholas entered as they were reviewing the document. He had changed nothing about his clothing, but there was a new tension in his posture, as if the information on the table had confirmed something he had not wanted confirmed. "Show me," he said. Sofia slid the documents across the table. Anthony Grimaldiero handled the first contract draft. His final payment from Vitale moved through an account controlled by a Russian import company. The same company has a history involving counterfeit medical equipment. Nicholas read the papers. Anthony hasn't worked for us in 8 months. His access may have been removed, but his relationship with Marco wasn't. Nicholas's gaze lifted. "What do you mean?" Marco approved his final payment. The payment was made 3 weeks after Anthony's contract ended. How much? $140,000. Nicholas turned toward Priya. Was that payment reported as a termination settlement? Consulting completion fee? Did Anthony complete the work? Priya checked the file. The contract says he was paid for route optimization and vendor development. Sofia pointed to the date. The vendor contract was created 11 months ago. Anthony's final payment was 8 months ago. He may have been paid after the first stage of the operation was complete. Nicholas looked back at the pages. "Find him. I'll need a location." "Find the location." Sofia closed the folder. "We can locate him through the payment trail, but if he has ties to the Russians, whoever is watching this investigation may know we're looking before we reach him." Nicholas's eyes met hers. "That is why you will not contact him." "I didn't say I would." "You will work from the records." "My people will locate him. I need to speak with him eventually." "You may, when I decide the meeting is secure. Your people aren't trained to conduct a forensic interview. They are trained to keep you alive." The statement was blunt, and Sofia felt the argument forming before she stopped it. Nicholas was not trying to prevent her from doing the work. He was setting a boundary around the risk he considered unacceptable. "I'll accept the arrangement," she said. "But any interview will be documented and I will be present." "Agreed." Priya glanced between them. That was easier than expected. Sofia ignored her. By noon, the operations communications arrived. The messages showed Marco had exchanged encrypted files with an address that belonged to a deactivated account. The messages themselves were gone, but the attachment names remained in the server metadata. 3 of them matched the missing container numbers. Sofia felt the significance before she spoke. The attachments were sent from Marco's office. Moser, standing beside the monitor, shook his head. The account may have been accessed from his office without him knowing. Who had access to his office? Operations staff. Who had access after hours? Security, cleaning personnel, Mr. Bellini, Mr. Vitale. Nicholas looked at Moser. "You forgot yourself." Moser's face paled. "I don't enter Mr. Bellini's office. That wasn't what I asked. Anyone with a master credential could bypass the electronic lock." Sofia copied the metadata. The messages were sent at 2:13 in the morning, 2:19, and 2:24. The same night the warehouse terminal was accessed. Nicholas's voice became very quiet. "Where was Marco?" Moser checked the security logs. According to the badge records, he was not in the building. Then someone used his office while he was absent. Or someone used his credentials from outside, Sofia said. "His office machine has internal certification," Moser answered. "Can it be remotely accessed?" "Yes." "By whom?" "Security Administration." Nicholas's eyes went to the folder containing the master credential records. The next hour was spent reconstructing the remote access. The evidence showed that Marco's office computer had been activated through the same administrative profile used in the warehouse session. The person who accessed it had opened a folder containing shipment schedules, copied 3 files, and sent them to the deactivated address. Sofia noticed an additional detail. The machine had been awakened by a manual command, not a scheduled maintenance process. Someone knew the computer was powered down, she said. Nicholas looked at her. How does that matter? If the operation had been automated, the system would have used a scheduled task. A manual wait command means the person knew exactly which computer to access and when it would be available. That narrows the field. It narrows the field to anyone familiar with the operations floor, the security system, and Marco's schedule, which still includes too many people. It includes one person who possessed the master credential and signed the approvals. Nicholas did not disagree. At 2:07 in the afternoon, one of Nicholas's men found Marco in the underground parking level. He had not left the building. He was standing beside his car, speaking on the phone. When Nicholas, Sofia, and Gregory Holt arrived, Marco ended the call. He looked at Sofia first, then at Nicholas. Am I free to go now? Nicholas stopped 6 feet away. Who were you speaking to? My attorney. Name. I don't have to answer that. Noted. Sofia held out a printed report. Your office computer was accessed remotely on the night the warehouse terminal was used. 3 shipment files were sent to a deactivated account. The access was authorized through the master security credential. Marco glanced at the report, but did not take it. You think that proves I did it? No, Sofia said. It proves someone used your office and your credentials. It also proves you had authority over the relevant shipments. Authority isn't guilt. Correct. Nicholas stepped closer. Where were you that night? At home. Anyone with you? My housekeeper. Name. Why? Because I asked. Marco's eyes narrowed. You can't hold me here indefinitely. You are not being held by the police. Then I am leaving. He moved toward the elevator. Nicholas did not block him physically. Instead, he said, If you leave this building, I will interpret it as a decision to place yourself outside my protection. Marco stopped. Sofia watched him turn around. For the first time, his expression showed something more than irritation. It showed calculation, followed by fear so quickly concealed that she might have missed it if she had not been looking for the exact moment his control weakened. What does that mean? Marco asked. It means the people you have been dealing with may no longer consider you useful. Marco's face went still. Nicholas continued. You have 2 options. You tell us what you know, or you walk out and discover how little loyalty exists on the other side of your arrangement. Marco looked toward Sofia. He is using you. Sofia answered before Nicholas could. You haven't given me a reason to believe anything you say. Marco's mouth tightened. You don't know what you're involved in. Then explain it. He looked at the elevator doors. They remained closed. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Marco said, The containers were not mine. Sofia raised her pen. Whose were they? I don't know. Who changed the routes? I signed the revisions because Nicholas ordered them. Nicholas's eyes hardened. I never ordered unauthorized route changes. You ordered me to keep certain shipments away from federal inspection. Which shipments? Marco did not answer. Sofia took 1 step forward. If you want protection, you need to give us information that can be verified. Marco looked at her. The Russians were using one of our carriers. Nicholas's voice became dangerously calm. Who allowed that? Anthony Grimaldiro arranged it. Who hired Anthony? Your uncle's people. Nicholas went completely still. Sofia registered the wording. Which uncle? Marco looked away. Nicholas's hand closed slowly at his side. Answer. Ambrose's people. The name meant nothing to Sofia, but it changed the atmosphere around Nicholas. Gregory Holt lowered his eyes. Even the security officer near the garage entrance seemed to understand that a line had been crossed. Where is Anthony? Nicholas asked. I don't know. Who paid him? Someone using a Russian account. Who inside Vitale authorized the payments? Marco said nothing. Nicholas moved toward him. The attack happened before anyone could ask another question. A man stepped from behind the concrete support column near the service corridor, wearing a maintenance jacket and carrying a compact weapon. He had been positioned less than 20 feet away, hidden by the angle of the parked vehicles. Sofia saw the movement, but Nicholas reacted first. He shoved her sideways and moved between her and the attacker. The shot struck Nicholas high in the shoulder. The sound echoed through the garage. But Sofia did not freeze. Nicholas staggered one step, caught himself against the side of a vehicle, and ordered everyone to get down. His men moved toward the attacker, who fired again and ran toward the service exit. Sofia dropped beside Nicholas. Blood was already spreading through the fabric beneath his collarbone. "Where is the wound?" "Shoulder." "Can you move your fingers?" He flexed his right hand. "Yes." "Any numbness?" "No." "Then sit down." "I can stand." That wasn't an invitation. He looked at her, and despite the pain, there was the faintest trace of recognition in his eyes. Sofia did not need expertise beyond basic first aid to understand the immediate priority. She needed him still, conscious, and in the hands of professionals as quickly as possible. Nicholas lowered himself against the vehicle. One of the security officers brought the garage emergency kit. Sofia pulled on the gloves, pressed sterile gauze firmly against his shoulder, and looked at Gregory. "Call emergency services. Tell them there has been a shooting and that the attacker fled through the service exit." Nicholas caught his wrist. "No ambulance." "You were shot," Sofia said. "You are going to a hospital. Your physician can meet you there if you want him involved." For a moment, he looked prepared to argue. Then, he looked toward the garage entrance, where his security team was already sealing the access points, rather than pursuing blindly into the street. "Call Dr. Daniel Costa too," he said. Gregory made both calls. Sofia kept steady pressure on the dressing and watched Nicholas's breathing and awareness until the paramedics arrived. She did not try to diagnose what she could not see. When they took over, she gave them the only facts she knew with certainty: where he had been hit, that he had remained conscious, and that the shooting had happened only minutes earlier. Across the garage, Marco had disappeared. Sofia looked up. "Where is Bellini?" No one answered immediately. Nicholas's eyes moved toward the elevator. "Find him." Two guards ran toward the service exit, while another checked the stairwell. Sofia kept her attention on the wound. "You were hit because you moved in front of me." "I moved in front of the shooter. I was between you and the shooter. That was the problem. You could have gone down. So could you." She pressed harder. "Don't argue while I'm treating you." His mouth closed. Boston police and emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes. The garage was treated as a crime scene. The service exits were checked, and the company's security staff turned over the relevant badge records and camera feeds, rather than conducting a private search of their own. Gregory Holt notified Dr. Daniel Costa and, after a brief argument that Nicholas lost, followed the ambulance to the hospital. Sofia remained long enough to make sure the financial evidence already in her custody was sealed. With a detective present, Daniel Moser preserved the garage footage and produced a forensic copy for the company's counsel and independent audit file. The recording showed that the attacker had entered wearing a maintenance jacket issued to the same contractor whose van had appeared at Pier 11 before the fire. The badge used to access the garage had been created that morning under the name of a temporary worker who did not exist in the contractor's records. Marco's disappearance was more troubling. He had left through the stairwell less than 30 seconds after the attack. The camera showed him carrying nothing, moving quickly and looking back once toward Nicholas. By early evening, hospital imaging had confirmed that Nicholas's shoulder injury had not damaged bone or a major vessel. He was discharged with his arm immobilized, strict instructions to limit movement, and Dr. Costa waiting at the building to make certain he followed them. Against better judgment and medical advice, Nicholas returned to the secured 9th floor. "He ran," Sofia said when she showed him the footage. Nicholas sat with his injured arm in a sling. He knew the attack was coming, or he panicked. He had time to help and chose to leave. Sofia looked at the footage again. He may have thought the attacker was there for him. That doesn't change what he did. No, but it changes what we can infer. Nicholas watched her. "You are still separating evidence from emotion. That is how we avoid convicting the wrong person." His expression softened into something that was not amusement. "You were shot at too." "Yes. And you are treating my cousin like a witness instead of a traitor. At this moment, he is both a person of interest and a potential witness." Nicholas glanced toward the security monitor. "If he reaches the Russians, They will kill him. Then find him before they do. We will. Sofia looked at his shoulder. You should go home and follow the hospital instructions. He rose. Sit down. I need to deal with Marco. You need to stay alive long enough to do that. Nicholas stopped. The order was not gentle, but neither was it angry. Sofia had no patience left for his refusal to acknowledge injury. He looked down at the sling securing his arm, then back at her. You are giving me instructions in my own building. I'm giving medical instructions to a patient. I am not your patient. Then stop treating discharge instructions like a negotiation. For a second, neither of them moved. Dr. Costa turned away to hide his expression. Gregory Holt looked at the ceiling. Nicholas sat again. For several seconds, Sofia kept one hand near his uninjured arm, close enough to steady him if he moved too quickly. Nicholas noticed. His gaze dropped to her hand and then returned to her face. You can stop watching me, he said quietly. I can. I'm choosing not to. Something changed in his expression. The answer carried none of the defiance that usually stood between them. Sofia was suddenly aware of how close they were, of the controlled rhythm of his breathing, and the fact that he had put himself between her and danger without asking what it would cost him. She stepped back before the moment could become more than either of them was ready to name. Stay seated, she said. This time, Nicholas did not argue. The attack had changed the investigation in a single afternoon. Marco had admitted that the Russians were using a Vitale carrier. He had named Anthony Grimaldero as the person who arranged the route. He had mentioned Ambrose's people, a name Nicholas clearly understood, and Sofia did not. Then a man wearing the same contractor's uniform connected to the warehouse fire had attempted to kill someone in the garage. The evidence no longer pointed only to a financial scheme. It pointed to a coordinated operation inside Vitale Cargo, one that had used Sofia's professional identity, corrupted the shipping routes, destroyed records, and now tried to silence the people closest to the truth. Nicholas remained seated while Sofia transferred every file from the garage footage to the encrypted drives. He did not ask her to stop. He did not tell her to leave. He watched in silence as she documented the attack, recorded the hospital timeline and police incident number, and wrote Marco Bellini's last known location in the margin of the timeline. When she finished, she closed the laptop and looked at him. Gregory had already authorized the release of the financial preservation notices requested by the detectives. Because the case now involved interstate transfers, falsified professional credentials, compromised shipping routes, and a foreign criminal network, he had also opened a formal channel with a federal contact. The complete audit package was not ready yet, but the authorities no longer had to discover the case after the company finished telling itself what had happened. Taylor needs to know I'm safe. Call her. Sofia did. Taylor answered immediately. Are you all right? Yes. That pause was too long. I was at the office. That's not what I asked. Sofia looked at Nicholas's shoulder. There was an incident. No one in our family was hurt. Taylor went silent. No one in our family? Not seriously. Is Nicholas there? Sofia glanced at him. Yes. Put him on. Nicholas raised an eyebrow but took the phone. Taylor. She spoke rapidly. Nicholas listened without interrupting. His face remained composed, but his eyes moved towards Sofia once. I understand, he said. She will not be alone tonight. Taylor said something else. Yes, he replied. You can trust the driver. Another pause. I'll make sure she comes to the apartment. He handed the phone back. Sofia ended the call. What did she ask? Whether you would stay with her tonight. And what did you promise? That I would make sure you went there. That isn't the same thing. It is what I could promise. She studied him, then nodded. I appreciate it. The words had become easier to say, but they carried more weight now. Nicholas had not asked her to thank him. He had not turned his protection into a debt. He had simply accepted the responsibility he had chosen. Outside, the security teams continued searching for Marco. The garage remained sealed, the maintenance contractor's badge preserved, and every access record from the previous 48 hours copied for review. Sofia collected her father's watch from the conference room later that evening and fastened it around her wrist before leaving. The hands remained frozen, but she no longer saw them as a reminder of loss alone. They marked the moment when everything had stopped making sense, and also the moment when she had decided to keep moving until it did. Nicholas walked beside her, toward the private elevator, his injured arm held close to his body. "You are not coming to Marlborough Street," she said. "I didn't say I was." "You were thinking it." "I was thinking about the security of the building." "Michael is outside. Taylor has the driver. The doors are controlled. That isn't the same as being protected." "No. It is the arrangement she accepted." Nicholas pressed the elevator button. "You are becoming difficult. I've always been difficult. You just have more evidence now." The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside, leaving the damaged day behind them for a few minutes, though neither of them believed the danger had ended. Marco Bellini was missing. Anthony Grimaldiro had disappeared. The Russians had entered Vitale's shipping network through a carrier no one had yet identified, and someone had fired a weapon inside Nicholas's own garage after using the same contractor's cover that had appeared at Pier 11. Sofia stood beside him in the quiet elevator, aware of the blood that had dried along the edge of his shirt and the steady way he kept his face composed despite the pain. She had begun the morning looking for proof. By nightfall, she had found a conspiracy, a traitor who might still be alive, and a man who had placed his body between her and a bullet before she had time to decide whether she trusted him. By Monday morning, the 9th floor conference room had become an evidence room. Sofia arrived with 3 encrypted drives and the final report she had assembled over the weekend. Nicholas was already there, his injured shoulder still supported, his movements slower than usual. Marco had not been found. Anthony Grimaldiro was still missing, but the case no longer depended on locating either man before the evidence could be presented. An independent cybersecurity specialist, Amanda Foster, reviewed the access history before the family meeting. She confirmed that the dormant administrator profile had been activated with the master security credential, and that the credential had been physically copied weeks earlier. Camera footage placed Marco inside Moser's office during the relevant period. The financial trail was stronger. The vendor payments, the altered routes, and the maintenance contractor used at both Pier 11 and the garage led through accounts tied to the same Russian intermediary. The contractor account ultimately connected to a private holding company controlled by Marco. A deleted calendar recovered from Marco's office contained the 3 container numbers and meetings marked with Anthony Grimaldiro and a Russian import representative on dates immediately preceding the route changes. Sofia kept the conclusion narrow. The evidence shows access, opportunity, financial connection, and coordination. It does not prove Marco acted alone. Nicholas looked at the report. No one edits that sentence. At 10, senior family members, executives, counsel, and security gathered in the same expanded 9th floor conference room where Sofia had first been accused. Nicholas had chosen the location deliberately. The people who had witnessed the accusation would witness its correction. Donna Costanza Vitale arrived last, leaning on a polished cane. She studied Sofia before taking her seat. "You are the accountant." "Yes." "The one they accused." "Yes. And now you are presenting the case." "I'm presenting evidence. What the family does with it is their responsibility." Donna gave a short nod. "Good." Nicholas took the head of the table, his shoulder still stiff beneath the sling. "Begin." Sofia did not dramatize the presentation. She moved through the chain in order. The $2.3 million transfer had used her certification number, but her badge and location history placed her away from the building when the authorization occurred. A dormant administrator profile created the session. The payment went to North Star Industrial Components, a shell-like vendor approved by Marco Bellini. 3 containers tied to that vendor carried contradictory cargo descriptions and route changes approved through Marco's office. Their receiving records were later targeted through the same administrator profile. At Pier 11, an unrequested maintenance van arrived minutes before the records room fire. Camera feeds lost brief intervals around its arrival and departure, and investigators recovered evidence of accelerant. The copied master credential, the Russian-linked payment trail, Marco's holding company, and the recovered calendar connected those events to a common network. Sofia displayed the garage footage last. The attacker used a false contractor identity tied to the same financial channel. Marco Bellini left the garage immediately after Nicholas Vitale was shot. That fact is relevant, but it does not by itself prove he ordered the attack. The door opened behind her. Marco stood between two security officers, exhausted, his jacket wrinkled and his expression stripped of its earlier ease. Nicholas looked at him. "You have one opportunity to speak." Marco laughed without humor. "You still think this was about $2 million? No. The Russians wanted the routes, port schedules, carriers that moved without attracting attention. They wanted a permanent channel. Who gave it to them?" Marco looked around the room. "I did." The confession landed harder because no one had forced the conclusion into his mouth. He said Ambrose Rinaldi's old network had promised him protection and a future position if Nicholas were removed. Ambrose himself had been dead for 6 years, but his people had kept the old relationships alive. "Why frame Sofia?" Nicholas asked. She was new, independent. Her certification number was on the audit paperwork. Everyone would look at her before they looked inside the company. Anthony Grimaldiero, Marco said, had selected the number and arranged the outside connections. Marco did not know whether Anthony was still alive. "And the garage?" Nicholas asked. Marco looked away. "I knew they were coming. I didn't know they would shoot." His silence after that said enough. Nicholas instructed Holt to deliver the complete file to the federal contact, already notified after Friday's attack. Marco would remain under voluntary protective supervision with counsel informed until federal agents arrived. Then Nicholas turned to the room. He suspended the contaminated routes, froze the relevant accounts, and ordered every vendor approved through Marco's office reviewed independently. Finally, he faced Sofia. Sofia Wells was not responsible for the theft. Her credentials were stolen and used to conceal an internal operation. I accused her before I verified the evidence. That was my failure. The room stayed silent. He confirmed that the company would provide written notice to her firm, the State Accounting Board, and the relevant regulators stating that she had identified the fraud and preserved the evidence. Sofia met his eyes. "Attach the independent report." "It will be attached." "Then I accept the correction." He did not ask for forgiveness. That mattered more than an apology designed to make him feel better. She did not respond immediately. The exchange was not romantic. It was not a resolution of everything between them. It was a public repair of a specific harm, and that distinction mattered. The meeting ended at 11:42. By early afternoon, the federal contact had received the encrypted files. Amanda Foster remained at the building to supervise the transfer. Daniel Moser began the process of replacing every security credential, and the legitimate shipping divisions were separated from the accounts and carriers connected to the Russian network. Sofia returned to the 9th floor conference room to collect her personal belongings. The wall still held the timeline, though several names had been crossed out and replaced by official reference numbers. Nicholas entered without knocking. His shoulder was stiff, but the physician had cleared him to leave. "Taylor's tuition," he said. Sofia looked up. "What about it?" "I arranged for an independent educational foundation to cover the remainder of her nursing program." She closed the notebook in front of her. "No, it isn't a payment from Vitale Cargo. I didn't ask for a foundation. It isn't connected to the investigation. Then why offer it? Because she should not have to abandon school because someone used your name in a criminal operation." Sofia studied him. "Does she know?" "Not yet." "Then don't arrange it until she does." Nicholas considered that. "You want her approval." "I want her choice. No conditions, no debt, no expectation that she will work for you or thank you for the rest of her life. There would be no conditions. Then it should be easy to tell her that." He nodded. "I'll speak with her through you." Sofia picked up her watch from the table. "That is better." Nicholas remained near the door. "Are you returning to your firm?" "After I finish the external report." "How long?" 2 weeks. "And after that?" She slid the watch onto her wrist. "I haven't decided." "You could work independently." "I could. You could continue auditing companies that are less likely to shoot at you. That would be a refreshing change." His expression shifted. Not quite amusement, not quite relief. I need someone to review the remaining subsidiaries. You need a firm. I need someone who will tell me when the numbers don't make sense. That person will charge you. I expect that. Sofia looked at him. You are offering me a contract. I am offering you a choice. The words carried a meaning he would not explain further. She did not answer immediately. She thought about the first morning, the accusation, the false paperwork, and the way he had pulled her closer in the conference room when he believed she had stolen from him. She thought about the fire, the threat against Taylor, the bullet that had struck his shoulder, and the public correction he had made without asking her to soften the truth. Trust had not arrived as a single decision. It had accumulated through verified actions. I will consider the contract, she said. Nicholas nodded. Fair. And I will not move into your house. I didn't ask you to. I will not accept a security detail that decides where I go. Agreed. I will not be treated as an employee who belongs to your organization. Agreed. And if I work with you, I retain independent authority over my findings. That was already in the agreement. It wasn't respected on the first day. His expression grew serious. It will be now. Sofia accepted the answer, not because promises were evidence, but because the record supported a change in his behavior. She and Taylor met at Sofia's Beacon Street apartment that evening. Nicholas did not come inside. He remained in the hallway with Michael while Sofia explained the foundation offer to her sister. Taylor listened, asked questions, and read the documents twice. Does this come from him? She asked. Not directly, but he arranged it. Would I owe him anything? No. Would he be able to withdraw it if you stopped working with him? No. Would I have to use a particular hospital after graduation? No. Taylor looked at Sofia. Then I accept. Sofia contacted Nicholas and told him. He asked to speak with Taylor. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. He explained that the foundation would pay the school directly, that the arrangement would be independent of Vitale Cargo, and that Taylor could reject it at any point. When he finished, Taylor said, "Thank you." Nicholas answered, "You are welcome." He did not make the exchange about Sofia. After the call ended, Taylor looked at her sister. He is still frightening. Yes, but he listens. Sometimes. Taylor smiled faintly. That may be the most positive thing you've said about him. Sofia did not deny it. The federal case moved into its formal investigative phase the next morning. Marco Bellini was transferred from protective supervision into federal custody. Anthony Grimaldaro was located 3 days later in a motel outside Providence, exhausted and injured but alive. He was placed under protection while he cooperated, and his statement confirmed the financial structure and identified the Russian intermediaries who had pressured Marco into opening the carrier routes. The money was recovered in stages. Accounts tied to the local intermediaries were frozen, the known contractor channels were dismantled, and the larger Russian network remained under investigation. The legitimate divisions of Vitale Cargo remained open, but the compromised routes were closed and audited by independent investigators. Nicholas kept every promise made to Sofia. The written correction went to her firm, the accounting board, and the regulatory agencies. 2 weeks later, Sofia returned to the 9th floor conference room with the final draft of an independent consulting contract. She had not moved into Nicholas's house. She continued living at her own apartment, continued visiting Taylor, and retained the authority to walk away if the company violated the agreement. Nicholas was waiting by the window. He wore a dark suit, his right shoulder healing well, and his light brown eyes were turned toward the harbor. When he saw the document in her hand, he did not reach for it. "Have you decided?" he asked. "I have. And I'll work with Vitale Cargo for 6 months. Independent authority, full access to the subsidiaries, and no concealed accounts." "Agreed." "After 6 months, I review the arrangement." "Agreed." She placed the contract on the table between them. "And one more condition." Nicholas waited. "If you accuse me of stealing again, you lose me immediately." His face became still. Then he said, "I won't make that mistake twice." It was not a grand declaration. It did not erase the first accusation. It acknowledged it, which was more honest than pretending the harm had never existed. Sofia looked toward the wall where the old timeline had been removed. Only a faint rectangle remained where the paper had covered the glass. Nicholas came closer. "You took something from me." She turned toward him. "What?" "The money was one thing, the roots were another, but you took the certainty I had about people." "I didn't steal that. You proved it was never worth what I thought." She studied his face. There was no anger in him now, only an unfamiliar openness that did not seem comfortable in his body. "You accused me because you believed control would protect you," she said. "Then you learned control isn't the same as certainty." His eyes remained on hers. "And what do I owe you for that lesson?" he asked. Sofia placed one hand on the contract. "Nothing. You owe me professional respect. I can give you that." "Then give me time." "I can give you that too." The space between them became quieter, but not empty. Nicholas reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to withdraw. Sofia allowed his fingers to close around hers. His touch was warm, careful, and restrained. Nothing like the force he had used when he first pulled her closer and accused her of taking what belonged to him. He looked down at their joined hands. "You stole from me," he said, his voice low. Sofia's mouth curved slightly. "The money wasn't yours to begin with. It belonged to the company." "I wasn't talking about the money." She understood then. He had not lost his authority, his company, or his name. He had lost the isolation he had mistaken for safety. She had entered his world as an accused stranger and forced him to look at the systems he trusted, the people he protected, and the ways fear had shaped every decision he made. "Then what did I steal?" she asked. Nicholas lifted his eyes to hers. "My heart," he said. "And now I want you to keep it." Sofia did not answer with a promise. She stepped closer, placed her free hand against his uninjured shoulder, and kissed him because she had chosen to, not because his money, his protection, or his power had purchased anything from her. When they separated, the contract remained unsigned on the table. The future was still complicated. The company still required audits. The Russian network had not vanished simply because Marco had been arrested. Taylor still had a demanding nursing program ahead of her, and Nicholas still carried the habits of a man who had survived by expecting betrayal. But the first truth between Sofia and Nicholas had no forged signature, hidden account, or convenient escape clause. It was a choice made in full view of the evidence.